Well, thank you everyone for taking time in your day today to join our site visit with Melbourne Women's Fund 2022 $40,000 Nurturing Grant finalists, the Northern Community Legal Centre. I'm Caroline Rhodes, member of the Melbourne Women's Fund Grants Committee. And before we begin, I invite you to join me in the spirit of reconciliation for our acknowledgement of country. Melbourne Women's Fund sincerely acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as First Australians and traditional custodians of country. We recognise and value their continuous connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Thank you. Before we meet the Northern Community Legal Centre team, there's just a couple of housekeeping items to help you get the most out of your visit today. Attendees will be muted and with videos off throughout the visit. You can enter questions and comments in the chat at any time, and we'll ask everyone's questions towards the end of the session. For anyone not familiar with how to access the chat area, you can just click on the chat bubble icon in the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of this window. If you can't see the toolbar, just hover your mouse over the bottom area of your Zoom window and it will pop up. Once you click on the chat bubble icon, it will open for you on the right and stay open. Lastly, this meeting is being recorded so we can make today's visit available to watch on our website. So we are so fortunate today to have the opportunity for an in-depth experience with our finalists. And I'm pleased to provide a brief overview of Northern Community Legal Centre's application. Their project seeking support is titled Take the First Step, Family Violence Peer Education Support. The project falls within Melbourne Women's Fund 2022 focus area of family violence. This project would take place in the City of Moreland and aims to train more bicultural women as peer leaders to improve safety and access to legal and other services for diverse women experiencing family violence. The team here with us today are Jenny Smith, Chief Executive Officer, and Tanya McKenna, Partnerships and Community Development Manager. I'm now pleased to hand over to Northern Community Legal Centre for our tour. Over to you, Jenny and Tanya.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for making the time. We were just talking about how Fridays used to be that day where you just sort of pick up and make up and fairly easygoing, but things seem to have changed a lot in the world. And this is one of them, I think, the busyness of it. So I really appreciate the time that you've taken out of your day to listen to us. Firstly, I would like to go through a little bit of the journey of Northern Community Legal Centre, just as some minor background before handing over to Tanya to talk about the project in more detail, the Take the First Step project. So I guess the context, Northern Community Legal Centre is a free legal service funded by the Commonwealth and state governments. Their funding, which is under the NLAP, the National Legal Assistance Program, funds around 43 centres in Victoria. Our funding, our recurrent funding, is around 1.25 million per year. That funding has to provide us with the employment of a number of lawyers, community development staff, and an executive team and an admin team. Excuse me, I've got a truck just coming into my street, so apologies for the noise in the background. I should also say, Tanya and I are both sitting in our homes because our building has very irregular internet. Unfortunately, our office is based in Broadmeadows, and I'm not sure why, but it has terrible internet there. back to who we are. So I think, firstly, our recurrent funding is around 1.25 million. Our service started in 2016. It was an amalgamation of two small community legal centres who, with, I guess, the support of Victoria Legal Aid, were massaged into the amalgamation to create an organisation that could be more strategic. And I think we've been incredibly strategic. In that 6 years, we've grown our income base past our recurrent funding by about 40%. So currently, in the last financial year, our income stood at around 2 million, which is, no mean feat. Most of that growth, or all of that growth, has been through generally competitive tendering processes with local government grants, philanthropic grants, trust and foundation grants through the Victoria Legal Services Board and the Victoria Law Foundation. In the last 6 years, we've received over 6 of those grants from the last 2 foundations and trusts mentioned, which is no mean feat. They are extremely competitive. And I think it goes to you having trust, I guess, in our credibility to both manage grants, but also to be provide the impact and the outcomes that we say that we are going to. Some of those grants have been repeated. There was an extension on one grant that I'll talk about shortly. But I guess the question that you might ask is, why do we need the grants? Why do we need your grant? Just a little bit about our catchment. So a Northern Community Legal Service Centre provides legal services, community development across the catchments of Mitchell Shire, so technically up to Seymour, Hume, and Moreland. And as I said, the project focus is on Moreland, and we'll talk about why that's the case. So that catchment of around 480,000 and growing rapidly every day, our catchment contains 2 of the growth out of the 4 growth corridors in Melbourne, has some of the highest rates of family violence. Annually, there's around 8,000 victims of family violence across that catchment, and also has really high rates of migrants and refugees. Hume, for example, has the highest rates in Australia of Syrian refugees. But there's lots of new migrant populations, and why I guess that presents demand on our services, the legal needs, understanding of the legal system, and also the vulnerabilities that population, as well as those experiencing family violence, as well as people with mental ill health, as well as young people, their legal need they experience is huge. Our service in the last 6 years, since opening in 2016, has targeted our services because of the demand on our services to those priority groups. And we continue to develop programs to allow us to not only just meet the legal needs of that group, but to also make sure that they're getting to our service. And that's really, really important. When I started in 2016 as the first CEO of the service, for example, the service was seeing 30% of the clients who experienced family violence. We now see 66% of our clients are victim survivors of family violence. Again, no mean feat. And we've done that by making sure that we go out into the community, make sure that people know what our service is, as we've done in the range of areas of those priority target groups, so young people, newly arrived, etc. So I don't know if I've probably answered the question of why would we be seeking funding from you? Our core funding basically provides service for 5 lawyers, and I think I said a small executive team and a small admin team, and that's pretty much it. So that 40% that we've increased in funding, that 600,000 to 700,000 a year, we've needed to get projects funded to get into the community, to identify the legal needs and to respond effectively. And a really good example of some of the impactful work that we've done in this space with one of those grants, so a grant from the Legal Services Board in 2019, provided for the grant was an Indian Women's Family Violence Project, and the grant provided for a migration project coordinator, migration lawyer, and some other lawyers to provide a wraparound legal service to Indian women. The project came out of an identified need of the high rates of family violence in that community in our catchment. There'd been a number of deaths, and there'd been observation and understanding by the service we really weren't getting Indian women into our service. So through a whole range of kind of reaching out to grassroots communities, identifying and talking to them about what their need was, we understood that one of the biggest areas that was forcing women back into unsafe situations was the issue of visa abuse. So women misunderstanding, not knowing about their rights, being forced to remain in unsafe situations. In that project, we saw 174 women. We knew we'd made the mark because of those 174 women, 93% of them reported physical violence, around 40% reported needing medical treatment. Shockingly, over half reported being sexually assaulted, and also 50% had experienced forced servitude. From that project, we got a further extension from the Victorian Legal Services Board. They saw that that was a really impactful project. And since that extension, we have now, through a competitive tendering process, successfully obtained 4 years funding from the Commonwealth to extend that project. And I think that's just a really good example of why we need these small grants, because from small grants, we can and have developed significantly successful projects that allow us to really create these safe pathways for very vulnerable women. I'm going to turn to Tanya to introduce herself and to talk a bit about the project.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks, Jenny. So my name's Tanya. A little bit about me is that I've been working in the family violence sector for about 20 years. I started off in direct client response, did that for quite a few years before moving to other roles around policy and education, and also working as a family violence trainer. So that was something I had quite a bit of experience in. Came to Northern, was delighted to see that family violence was such an important focus, because there's also such a passion of mine personally as well. So the First Step project, I'll tell you a little bit about the first iteration of the project. So it was developed in response to our learnings of how do we reach isolated women, newly arrived, not aware of the rights and the laws in Australia. So we identified peer-to-peer education as the strategy most likely to overcome the barriers that women face. And we recognise that it's for women having those casual conversations in language with other women where they're most likely to get their source of information. So we started off this project in partnership with Dallas Neighbourhood House. We didn't quite know what to expect. We had this great idea, but we didn't know who would apply, who would be interested, what kind of women would they be, how would they be connected to their communities. So it was a little bit of an exploration of a journey for us. We put out some comms and some communication materials, and we waited to see who would respond. And I'm delighted to say that we had 12 brilliant women from diverse communities who put up their hand to be part of this project. They were from multiple cultural backgrounds, including Iraq, Jordan, India, Turkey, Pakistan, Iran, and Syria. And so that mix is really representative of the community that we're working with. They were women that were all really active in their own community. So they were all mostly parts of other groups within the community as well. So they were women who'd taken on informal leadership roles and really acting as the connectors in their community for other people, which is exactly what you want in a peer education program. They were passionate about making a difference. We didn't recruit women based upon lived experience. Like any group of women, there was 1 or 2 women in there who did have lived experience. Nearly all of them, though, had experience of supporting a family member or a friend experiencing family violence, or having witnessed family violence as a child. So that was what was driving the passion in the group. We did consider screening, and we did do some screening with the women. We were aware of the risk for women who might be experiencing family violence currently. So we did decide to exclude women who had a current crisis situation. And there was only 1 woman that was excluded on that basis, but she was also referred to other supports as well to put in place for her. We had another woman with recent experience of family violence, but we spoke to her in depth and realised that she had really good systems in place. She was protected by a family violence intervention order. She had a great support structure, but we were mindful around exposing her publicly. Her contribution was just invaluable. We worked with these women to develop a video, which I will put into the chat, the link if anyone wants to have a look at it later on. And in that video, there is a woman receiving text messages from her partner, and the text messages in that video are actually from that woman's lived experience. And I think that's what makes this particular video we developed so powerful. So how did we do the project? We started off with doing a series of education sessions covering a range of topics. So this was an opportunity for the women to unpack their own understanding of family violence, looking at the commonality of experiences, but also some of those cultural differences of experiences as well. We also made sure the women knew about the laws in Australia, the services that could assist in the various pathways to safety, and particularly the role of a lawyer in making women and children safe. So the women were the ones who came up with the messaging, take the first step, and that was really important. They wanted women to know that taking the first step is to find out about what are your rights in Australia, how can the law assist, and how can services assist. We then worked with those women and some film producers to develop this video that I mentioned. And the women were very sure about what they wanted. They knew where they wanted the story to be based. They knew that they didn't want to see violence, but they wanted to really emphasize coercive control. They acted in the film, and they did the scripting for the film as well. So it was very much their design of what was developed. Their ideas were so firm that they often threw out what the producers had developed and scrapped that entirely for their own ideas. So, it really was them leading the project. We wanted to broaden the impact of the work that was being done to create this video. And so in addition to this, we created a Take the First Step section on our website, which had that information located for women who had newly arrived who want to find out about their rights in Australia. We also then developed posters and social media campaign materials with a poster that said, take the first step, which also had a QR code linking women to our website to access that information. And so then the women also played an instrumental role in distributing that information, putting it up in places where newly arrived women go. That could be schools that their children attend. It could be a local GP, which is commonly used. It could be a specialist grocery store. But again, they were the cultural guides around where do we put the campaign materials so women can access those. So I guess I really wanted to emphasise that when we talk about peer educators, we are using these women as our cultural consultants. We're co-designing messaging for their communities that is led by them. We're also using them to improve our cultural safety as an organisation. So one example is that we recently put on our website a legal triage tool where people could use the tool to answer a whole lot of questions about quite sensitive information to get an appointment with a lawyer. And so we wanted to find out from them, were the questions appropriate and how would they feel about being asked questions about their personal information, such as family violence? Would they prefer to use an online tool or to speak to someone face-to-face? So that's just one example of how those women continually ensure that our services are appropriate to the communities that we're targeting. Another example of how we wish to use the peer educators, particularly in this project going forward, is that we recognise we often get asked to speak to community groups for women of particular cultural groups. For me, I've got lots of experience working in family violence, but obviously I am not the right person to facilitate conversations around those really cultural, complex issues and pressures that affect women's pathways to safety. So to be able to use our peer educators to go and co-facilitate those conversations will really enhance our capacity to engage with our community. We also want to give the women participating some skills that they can use in their own life as well. So if these activities can lead to greater employment opportunities for our peer educators, that is something that we'd strongly encourage. And we've already identified one peer educator that we're hoping to, at some point, employ at our organisation as well. Another key learning is just around valuing the time of our peer educators and having a model based on mutual respect. So that means we do pay them to ensure that they are covered for any expenses that they incur for their time in the form of some gratuity payments as well. So this is really recognising the value of this work to us as an organisation and our respect to the women who participate in the program. Finally, I just want to touch on evaluation and demonstrating impact. We have a policy and evaluation lead whose role is to ensure that every program has a robust evaluation plan and that data collection strategies are implemented at the start of each project that we do. So as Jenny mentioned, we're really hoping to show outcomes that will lead to sustained funding of programs like these. So in addition to providing quantitative data, we really want to capture the women's experiences. So one of our ideas is to film the women, use their voices. We want to promote their voices to explore what the program meant for them personally, and how that has impacted upon their capacity to inform others in their lives. Just one thing I wanted to mention in terms of outcomes to date, quantifying success in the family violence space is a really difficult thing to do. But I did have a look at our data just to see how we could see the increasing numbers of women from culturally diverse backgrounds accessing our services, experiencing family violence. So in the past 6 months compared to the previous 6 months, that number's increased by 55%. So while we can't say that all of that increase is down to our community development work, it certainly shows that what we're doing is working and women are increasingly accessing us for legal support. I'm going to hand it back to Jenny, who's going to read you some words from one of our peer educators. And just for a bit of context, in 2018-2019, there was a spate of suicides of 7 Indian women in the northern suburbs of Melbourne. And and further investigation revealed that this was in the context of family violence. And advocacy from the CLC sector was instrumental in drawing attention to the circumstances of these women. So Urmila, our peer educator, was friends with one of these women. Jenny, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Goodness, I think you'd get used to unmuting and muting. Thanks, Tanya, for that. Before I go to the words of Urmila, who was one of the participants in the first project, the pilot really, I just want to be kind of clear, because I suspect we haven't been very clear about the iteration of the Take the First Step. The project began as a partnership project with Dulles Neighbourhood House, which is situated in Broadmeadows. That actually occurred through a conversation that I'd had with the newly appointed manager of that service. And I had spoken to her about one of the most significant issues for her as a neighbourhood house coordinator, and the context that she would be working in was the rates, the very, very high rates of family violence. So from that conversation, she saw an opportunity, applied for a neighbourhood house grant, and was successful in obtaining that. And that partnership, the first project grew from that. Tanya did the training in that project and designed, if you like. The neighbourhood house role was to support the women who were also, attending the neighbourhood house, and a range of other administrative and coordination role. Because of the success of that initial pilot, we then sought funding from Hume Council for the next iteration of the project. So from the and that project is currently in Hume running. Off the back of that, not even consecutively, but running at the same time, we've been successful in getting a grant from the Victorian Law Foundation to run the Take the First Step project in Mitchell Shire. A really important area to be doing it in for a range of reasons. The rates of family violence are even higher than most of the rates in Victoria. From that, we also see the big gap in moorland. These projects are very particular to the communities of women living in those catchments, and there are different cultural communities in each of our catchments. There's big overlaps, but for example, Urmila, who was one of the participants in the first iteration of the project, is of an Indian background, but there were women from Turkish backgrounds, from Lebanese backgrounds, women who are Islamic, women who are Assyrian. So a whole range that were very particular to the Hume local government area. In terms of what we would expect in moorland, there's a whole lot of women that we would hope to get to. The different communities in moorland are the Afghani community, the Turkish community, Lebanese community, and a smaller Indian community. So I guess I hope I've made that clear in that journey, both in terms of the credibility of the project, our collaborative role in developing the project from its initial, taking the learnings from that and using them to establish an extension of that project in Hume, extending it to Mitchell Shire, and now hopefully extending it to moorland. Before I go, I'll go back to Urmila, who has approached us also, Tanya, I don't think said, she wants to volunteer. So apart from anything else, reaching women who are able to reach their community and also support the work that we do in the family violence space. So this is some words from Urmila on why she got involved, what it meant to her. She said, "The problem is growing as we speak. It hit me hard when it happened to someone I knew and worked with. The person committed suicide in spite of having a good job, owning her own dream house. She worked that day as usual. That same evening, she ended her life. It was a shock to all of us as there was absolutely no sign of distress. She was being abused emotionally and went on to suffer in silence until she could take it no longer. She chose to end her life instead. It made me think, what if she'd told me or anyone else what she was going through? That maybe could have saved her life. That was my motivation, that if I could help one person from tragedy, it would be worth the try. If ordinary people like us could do something, instead waiting for somebody else or government, this problem could be eliminated. We can all help make a difference. Through this training program, I learned different types of abuse women go through. I learned it could be physical, emotional, sexual, or controlling. I learned that the signs that someone is going through this and how to identify them. We discussed how that person and the children are affected by it. We concluded that these women are staying in fear and don't know what to do. They don't even know that there is help available and are isolated and do not have the courage to tell anyone. They're just hoping that the abuse will stop eventually. It's false hope and it's not a safe environment for them and their children. The video we made will show you that there are safe places where they can go for help, places away from the home where they won't be at risk of their partner finding out. We all agreed, working on this film together, we didn't want to show any violence, which could remind women of their past and will impact negatively. Our message was simple: take the first step, get help. With that step taken, there is hope to change the situation and they can be happy. The first step is to become strong and face the situation with help from the resources that we know now are available. We believe this video will empower women to take the first step. We think that we are giving simple but very powerful messages which need to be communicated to all our communities. It's not specific to any community, and we are not going to stop at this video. We all want to work more towards the problem. We can keep an eye in the community where we can suspect if there is a problem and guide that helpless person. As a human being and part of the community, we all owe it. My hope is that we do not need to make videos like this because women are empowered and safe in the future. Thank you. I think that's the end of our presentation. And if anybody, I think, wants to ask questions, maybe Caroline, it's handed over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jenny and Tanya, for sharing the details, you know, of your organisation and the program and those very powerful, powerful words. And having seen the video myself, I can vouch for the power of this video and how it communicates such a simple message. It's yeah, I got a little bit teary watching that, as did my husband. But look, we can now turn to questions, and I would like to start off by asking two. Tanya, I know you sort of touched on this during your talk, but are you able to speak a little more as to how the program will be delivered in a culturally safe manner?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously there's challenges when you're working with women from a variety of different backgrounds and having a number of women who don't have English as the first language as well. It was really important to us to recruit a facilitator for the second part of this, for the second iteration of this project, who was representative of the same communities that many of the women were from, not all of them. So we did have a bilingual worker who is Arabic speaking, which we've actually had Arabic speaking workers support this project all the way along. And those were the women with the language groups that we're struggling to engage a little bit. As an organisation, though, we've really focused upon ensuring that we have cultural safety embedded across the organisation. So we have an incredibly diverse board who is also representative of our community, and we employ bicultural workers and lawyers as much as we can. But I think it's just really important to emphasise that our role with working with the women in this group is to listen to them and to let them guide us in terms of what is culturally safe. So it really is that co-design approach where they're the experts and we're just there to listen to them.
Excellent, thank you. And my next question is about your organisation receiving support previously by the philanthropic community. What do you think has been the appeal by these funders to support your work? Either Jenny or Tanya, who'd like to answer that?
I think I can take that one. I think it's both that we've delivered. We've delivered on what we promised. We've spent a lot of time getting evidence together and prioritising evidence that goes into our grant applications. And I think Tanya said that her background is in family violence. My background is I'm a lawyer. I was a family lawyer. I led what was called the Independent Children's Lawyer Section at Legal Aid. I'm deeply committed to, progressing the state of protecting violence against women and children. So I think that passion is known also. I've been in the legal and justice sector for a long time. And I think they see we do a lot with very little.
Can I add something to that, Jenny, too? I just think also with all the work we do, it also leads towards advocacy for systemic change. So when we see what's going on the ground and we can identify what needs to change to improve, we do a lot of advocacy for systemic reform as well. So I think that's sort of some of our learnings in the migration space around family violence and women on temporary visas. That's quite obvious to our funders as well, that we have quite an impact on the work we do.
Great, thank you. Amanda, do we have any further questions in the chat?
Thanks, Caroline, and thanks, Jenny and Tanya. It's been really great to hear more about the project that's seeking funding. We do have a question that is asking whether the program works. Does your organisation actually work with girls and teenagers under 18 as well as adult women?
I'll start answering that and then flick to Tanya. We do. Young people are a priority because we know that a whole range of legal needs are really high. We have a youth lawyer, and currently we have a youth community development project because we know the impact of COVID, like everyone knows, has been particularly bad for young people. The project is Safe at Home, and it's to work with groups of young people, so not particularly women. It's not a peer education project, it's a support and project, and I think that's a great idea. I think that the first step could have a youth extension iteration in the future. I think that it's probably youth peer educators. I feel like young people are too overwhelmed in the last year, and the project would really need to think about the impact on young people's mental health and their capacities at the moment. But I really, I'm going to put that on my to-do list in the next 2 years. So thank you. Tanya, you wanted to talk briefly about the youth project.
So the youth community development worker is currently doing a project which is for 10 to 14-year-olds, so a much younger cohort than what we've worked with in the past. And it's working with children who've experienced trauma such as family violence, but also other forms of family trauma, and trying to work with them to really build their protective factors and resilience, and to really empower them to be able to have a voice, because the impact of trauma is far greater when young people have no control in their situation as well. So it's assisting young people to be able to name their emotions and their experiences and to have a voice in things that are affecting them, and build protective factors that will support them to engage proactively with organisations and services that can assist as well.
Thanks, that's really good to hear. And we've got another question just popped up. Have each of the iterations involved similar numbers of peer educators?
So in terms of the background, the original project, we worked with a group of women for about 6 months to both deliver the training and develop the videos. That was quite a short-term project, but we had 12 women participate, and probably 10 that had sustained engagement the whole way through the project. So not unusual to have a dropout rate of a couple. We then had a 6-month break in 4-month break in funding while we're trying to actively seek a small grant to be able to continue the project. So we have only just recently relaunched the Hume project with funding that we received. They've had now 2 meetings, and they've held a large-scale community event. At the moment, we've got 8 women in the group. We worked with them to put on a large Week Without Violence event last week, where they invited all of their friends and families to attend. And so we actually had about 50 people in a room listening to family violence presentations, watching the video that the women made, painting T-shirts with family violence messaging, and doing a whole range of activities for Week Without Violence. And it was great to see partners coming along and kids involved. So that's just one thing I wanted to say. The expansion of the project into the Mitchell region has only just commenced as well. We've just had our first meeting. We currently have 6 members of the group, but we expect that as we do these community events, we've already had some expression of interest following our Week Without Violence event, which happened just last week. So we can see that as we do that work, we get more women coming in who want to be involved as well.
Great, thanks, Tanya. We don't have any more questions, so I'll hand back to Caroline, who's just going to wrap up the day for us. Thanks, Caroline.
No, thanks, Amanda, and thank you, Jenny and Tanya again, and thanks for everyone for being here today. And look, before I go, just like to remind everyone that the Melbourne Women's Fund Information Night video, which has information about the Northern Community Legal Centre and our other 2022 finalists, will be on our website soon. And secondly, the Grant Awards celebration is now back to an in-person event this year. Very exciting. So that'll be held on Thursday, the 17th of November at Melbourne Town Hall. So if you haven't booked already, please see the link that Amanda has just posted in the chat, and reminders will also be posted on our socials. And finally, a sincere gratitude to Jenny and Tanya at Northern Community Legal Centre, and all of our other finalists, and also to our members who all make these grants possible. So I hope to see you at the Grant Awards ceremony on the 17th of November, and thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.